Hello, my name is Miss Sides, and today we're going to talk a little bit about figurative language. Not just figurative language, but more specifically, similes and metaphors. So, figurative language is just that. It's language that doesn't mean exactly what it says. For example, if I said it was raining cats and dogs outside, I don't mean that it's raining cats and dogs and they're falling out of the sky. What I really mean is that it's raining really hard. And sometimes, especially in the English language, it's hard to understand figurative language. So we're going to zone in on two specific types of figurative language, similes and metaphors, because they're very similar, but they're also different. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to minimize myself so that you can see the document that we're going to need to work with today. So here I go. All right, there we are. So if you'll notice on our document, it says at the top, writers use similes and metaphors to compare two unlike things. Well, that's how similes and metaphors are alike. They are used to compare things, okay? They're also alike because they're two forms of figurative language, but they are different. Okay, so the definition of a simile is that we use like or as to compare different things. That's the most important part. That like or as. Okay, then metaphors. Okay, the definition of metaphor is that they say one thing is another thing. So we could use any form of the verb be. They are, she is, they were, to, so we could use any form of the verb be to compare one thing to another, and it would now be a metaphor. Okay, so let's just talk about similes. For example, a simile is I'm as gray as rain. That really important thing that you need to pay attention to here as I'm highlighting it is the words as. Okay, you could also use the word like. You could say, I'm gray like rain. Okay, so basically, the author of this book, Firebirds, wrote this to compare herself to rain. And the purpose or the meaning is the really important part of understanding similes and metaphors. So she's not describing the color of her skin. She's really describing how sad she is. Okay, now we're going to move on to metaphors. This is the key difference, and this is where a lot of students get confused. Okay, they think that similes and metaphors are so alike that they often get them mixed up, which is why we're looking at them side by side today. Okay, so again, the simile is this really important part about similes is that it has to contain the words like or as. Okay, like in I'm as gray as rain. Okay, but metaphors just say that one thing is another. So they could say something like, you are the clouds and sky and air. In this metaphor, we're comparing a person to the clouds, sky, and air. And it's not just the person, but if you were to read more of the book where this metaphor came from, they're actually describing a girl that's dancing. So the purpose or the meaning of that metaphor is that the author wants you to see that she's dancing and her dancing is full of movement all around. Okay? So we can identify similes and metaphors when we're reading, understand what they're comparing, and determine the purpose and meaning of those similes and metaphors. But we can also use similes and metaphors to help our writing. And I'm going to show you what that looks like before we take a little deeper look at identifying similes and metaphors in our reading, because if we can write similes and metaphors and understand what they mean when we write them, then we can also read them and understand what they mean. All right, so here we are. We have the sentence, "The crickets chirped." Now, I don't know about you, but that's a pretty boring sentence to me. It's very basic. The crickets chirped. Okay, it's still a correct sentence, but it's not the best sentence that it could be. So, how could we make that a really great sentence? Well, we could figure out a way to add a simile or a metaphor into that sentence. So I think the easiest thing would probably be to make it a simile. The crickets chirped like blank. The crickets chirped as blank as blank. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and type the crickets chirped as loud as. Now we need to think of something that's loud. Let's see. The crickets chirped as loud as a rocket? Not quite. The crickets chirped as loud as a crowd in a football stadium. That's better. The crickets chirped as loud as. I think I really like the one about as loud as a crowd at a football stadium. Yeah. So not only did we make our sentence more interesting, we also were able to clarify to our reader just how loud those crickets were. And before, we didn't know how loud the crickets were. So now we're going to look at the next sentence. The next sentence says, "The cave was dark." So this sentence, again, it's a great sentence. It has a capital letter, it has a period, a subject, and a verb. It's a good sentence, but it's not the best that the sentence could be. Okay, we need to make it more interesting, and we could do that by elaborating on the sentence and making it into a metaphor. So remember when we were talking about the simile, we have to use the words like or as. So we used as in our sentence above. So we could also use like. We could say the crickets chirped like a crowd at a football stadium, and that would still be a simile. But for the next sentence, we want to make that sentence a metaphor. Okay, so we're going to say the cave was, the cave was dark. We need to turn that into a metaphor. So we're going to say the cave was the darkest night. So we're no longer saying that the cave was just dark. We're now saying the cave was night, just to show you exactly how dark the cave was. So now we've put a little bit more clarification on how dark the cave was, and that's going to help our reader to imagine what's actually going on. And here is the key part. In order for it to be a metaphor, it cannot use as or like, and our sentence does not, and it has to use either it is, it was, it were, they are. Okay, so we're going to continue on. This is just how you could spice up your writing and practice writing similes and metaphors. Then we're going to continue, and we're going to practice identifying similes and metaphors in our reading. I have two short paragraphs on the board, on the screen, and we're just going to take it one at a time. So the first paragraph says, "The first time Angela visited the museum, her head was spinning from all the new sights around her. The museum was full of displays about different animals and plants. The rooms were packed with strange stuffed birds, glass cases full of feathers. She learned so much information about all the weird and wonderful creatures in the world." Okay, so we've got to identify the example of figurative language in the paragraph. All right, So this is a little bit of a difficult paragraph to identify the figurative language in, but if you look real closely, there's no comparisons um, with like or as. So we're really looking for a metaphor. And the best example of a metaphor is right here where it says her head was spinning. Okay, can your head really spin all around physically? No, it can't. But you can, in a figurative way, describe your head like that. Um, so really, she's comparing her head to something that spins. Okay, and the purpose was just to show you how she felt. Okay, so how would you feel if your head was spinning? Well, you could be feeling, to me, I think she's feeling excited and she's interested in all the things that she's about to learn. So um, she's getting a lot of information. So we're going to continue on to the next paragraph to here. My new teacher, Miss Grossman, could have been a pirate captain in another life. She looks like she is adventurous. I like tall, rugged boots she wears. Sometimes when she stands at the front of the class, I imagine her on a deck or behind a ship's wheel. To me, her voice is like a loud, rough sea. It's harsh but also soothing to hear. So this paragraph, it's a little bit easier to identify the figurative language, and I think you probably realize that it's a simile. So if we're looking for a simile, we're going to hear the words like or as in the sentence, and it's going to be comparing something. That's key. It has to be a comparison. It can't just say, I like tall, rugged boots, okay? Because that's not comparing anything, one thing to anything else. But when it says to me, her voice is like a loud, rough sea. It's comparing the teacher's voice to the ocean, to the sea. And so that is our simile. And it also has the word like in it here. Okay. So this is what your objective is today. You are not only going to practice writing similes and metaphors, but you're also going to read, and as you're reading, identify similes and metaphors. Remember, it's really easy to get them mixed up because they're alike in many ways. They're both forms of figurative language. They both compare one thing to another, but here's the key. The key is metaphors just say that something is something else. And similes use the words like or as. I hope this helps you in your understanding of similes and metaphors.